Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 11 of EUphoria. Once again, being produced remote. Strong start for me. Produced remote. I'm Dracos. Yamato Cannon is down and to the left of me, and directly below me in the world of cameras is Maurice Amazing Stuckenschneider, strategic coach, I believe the title for Misfits Gaming. Well, I'm excited to have you here. And before we, jump into the world of League of Legends, which I'm sure everyone's excited to hear about, how's everybody doing personally, being cooped up all day, every day, hiding from the sun like it's we haven't done it for years prior to this?
No, I mean, could be better for sure. I think the players are starting to feel it, that they're getting more burned on than usual, especially not being able to go gym, not being able to honestly go outside together doing stuff. I think they definitely feel it, but I think the day-to-day business hasn't really changed for us, so we're still doing the work that we're supposed to do and making sure that our team is going to be the best they can be.
I feel kind of the same, even on our end. We're kind of just, I'm sitting home mostly, but the freedom not being able to go outside and do things that you want to do on occasion, I think you can definitely feel it, especially because I self-quarantined and I was just staying in this room, which is not that exciting. And I think I was borderline going insane, but then you kind of find your rituals again. You make sure you shower and you put on a cap in this case, and then you keep cool, you figure it out.
I mean, Corona doesn't make you stop showering, bro. But
It's what the sense of, you go insane because you don't get to go outside. You have nothing to do. You're working from home,
You wear sweatpants every day. You don't really need to get dressed. Your standards for yourself, I do feel like they drop. Respect to you, Amazing, for keeping your standards up. But yeah, I agree. I'm with you, Yamato. I had to force myself to get dressed every day, not just wear the same pajamas all day every day. It's so bizarre. But interestingly enough, as our league continued last week, coverage was a bit shaky, but I think we got there in the end. And sadly, at the end of this week, for these teams at the bottom four, they went from, playing their hearts out to fight for playoff seeding to all four of them being knocked out, as our top six is now locked. But I wanted to talk kind of one last time about Schalke, Vitality, XL, and SK before they're all gone. After this, we'll never speak about them again for the rest of the season because there's no reason to. But yeah, kind of just... wow, I'm blanking on words today. Funeral? Funeral's not the right one. It's a funeral. There was a less harsh... Eulogy. That was it. Eulogy. The less harsh version of funeral. That was the word that I was looking for. Thank you, Maurice. So looking back on the split, I want to know, are any of these teams we always talk about spring split teams and summer split teams, you know what I mean? And there's always those teams that kind of ramp up over spring and then you have hopes for summer. Are any of these teams that? Are we holding out hope for any of these lineups? Excel was pretty solid, just kind of outside. But what do you guys think? Who stands out to you?
I think personally, Schalke. I have hope for Schalke because they have had such a strong end to their split. And overall, they kind of figured out the style that they want to play. I think it's really similar to last year, honestly, when spring they had a really volatile style where they had the mental combination with with the whole roster didn't work out simply because they were just relying on counter picks too much. And I think we kind of saw the same thing this year where when they had Forgiven, they were relying on quad lane counter picks and then suddenly realized that this doesn't work. Jungle can't really control the game. Gillis wasn't quite the jungle they were looking for. And they always revert back to the same style, which is basically the control heavy style in the summer. And I think towards the end of spring, they have definitely shown that already.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think Schalke definitely, I think the second half win ratio is positive. They started the season with the Brazil 1-7 with the victory over G2. I think if we continue on to the other teams, I think XL is pretty much the exact same team as last year, but with an improved bot lane. I think Patrick has played super, super well, but it's the same issues remain. And I was quite surprised because I thought with the addition of Young Buck, I thought everything would kind of shape out to be different. I expected growth. I think XL kind of delivered the same thing over and over. Of course, we can't know what's going on the inside. I'm not making any kind of assumptions here, but XL, strong early game, most of the games, mid to late game, looks very, very clueless in a lot of cases. Even the game against Vitality that they played 2 weeks ago, they almost lost, but they just got carried because they had the draft. I remember you put out the tweet, Amazing. And I was quite disappointed by this. But in the end, this is a roster that is filled with veterans. And they have players with a lot of experience, and when you have players with that much experience that can't figure out the basics of how to win out games, I would be kind of worried, you know.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me that like those are the two names that you jump on. We'll bring up our SK and Vitality in a second here, but this sounds super disappointing, to be completely honest. I think you guys are stating it like kind of lightly, but to me, the Schalke one is interesting because I don't know, like I don't see the same carryovers. Where Excel, it's like mostly the same team, right? Obviously, you can say different bottom lane, but it's the same top side. Is this a situation where like Excel have to make radical changes, do you think, coming into the next split? Because if we saw the same thing last summer, maybe slightly worse, you could argue, right? It's slightly better now. Is there hope for either of you guys that if we keep the same roster, keep the same setup, that coming into summer, that this is a playoffs contention team? Or is this a team that's just going to sit at 7th unless other teams around them get worse?
I mean, I think they have hope. It's clearly dependent on the meta, though. I think so far what they've shown in spring is like trying to make this early game style work, and clearly the players are not really fit for it because they keep throwing mid game. I don't think that the players are inherently bad at team fighting, but it's more about that they don't understand how to snowball leads properly. So I think on Teamfight Champions they've shown some prowess. I think especially Tora and Kato are more late game players in general. I don't see them as early game players at all. Like the mechanics are like decent, but they're not great, but they have good teamfight understanding. And I think if the meta shifts, it also assists Youngbuck a lot more because he has always been the one that, one coach where you don't win mid to late games against because his drafts are really good in that kind of regard, and he understands the meta in those scenarios a lot better than if it's an early game meta. He has never been an early game coach, in my opinion.
Also, to add on that, it's always like in the middle of a season, it's difficult to make radical changes. And I think the issues that lie with Excel is, I think usually when you figure out a way to play the early game, because I think Excel still managed to like claw their way through, like they had 2K leads coming into the mid game. And then I think the way they control space has just been rather weak. I think there's been a lot of scenarios where they're in a position where they need to control Nash space, and they're kind of just taking mid prio, and then that's it. They don't walk with the wave. They let the enemy AD carry clear it for free, while everyone else is just chilling in bushes and waiting for the enemy to start Nashing or aim for the 50-50. I don't think they control space correctly, and I think this gives teams a lot of breathing room. I remember the game against Fnatic as well, the first one of the split. It was also a game that was supposed to be over after that double kill onto GP, but nothing kind of came out of it. And I think the key thing for me in terms of their players, I feel like Mickey and Expect are very, very inconsistent. Their performance is really, really up and down. And I think this weighs very heavy on Excel. So in terms of like player quality and making changes, I wouldn't be that drastic because I still have faith in the process of Youngbuck based off of his experience and in the past. I think these are issues that you can definitely address because even from our point of view and from my point of view, like I watch Excel games, but they see so much more, and I think it's easy to assess what their problems are. It's not this situation where everything kind of just goes bad. Like if someone asked me what is the problem with SK, I would be like, you know, I don't know where to start, brother. You know, because there's very little to work with.
Oh God, oh man.
Why not though? Let's hit a little bit on the SKs and Vitalities of the world. We can round out with Schalke, but I think that like, obviously, both of these teams had awful splits, like just terrible. And I'd say that at this point, the only team that has looked worse to me than this Vitality team and this SK team is the Schalke that was playing right before they started swapping players out. Yeah. When it was like full solo queue and everyone was like, we don't even know what they're doing on stage. I think it was like week 3 was like the last time we really got to see that still going. So what, Jacob, obviously you formerly worked for Vitality. Actually, this is great. Maurice, you formerly, or you didn't formally play for SK. I was going to say Schalke again. Anyway, we've got one half of the quadrant here. But I'm curious, like, what if you guys were coaching these teams, if you're working with these teams, what do you do after a split like this if you're Vitality or SK?
Oh, I think Vitality, it's weird because I think they've shown glimpses of good things. I think the biggest issue with Vitality is I think a lot of those losses weighed on them. They had visa issues. And I think on top of that, like Sagan was pretty much playing LFL, LEC at the same time, and I don't know how he pulled that off. Like just a lot of craziness for Vitality in general. And then week by week, I felt like they were always trying something new in terms of trying to find their identity. And it's like, if we compare last year's Vitality, when we had team issues, eventually when you want to put wins on the board, you need to have like a set way of winning, you know? And we had a lot of success with just playing through Cabo Shard, which made us a very limited team coming into playoffs, but we knew how to put wins on the board. And I think always, week by week, I feel like they are trying something different. They're just throwing something on the wall just to see what sticks. Sometimes they play through bottom, or it doesn't work. The dive fails. Next game, they try to play through top. I think when you're in that position, you need to just simplify and try to play the same way every game, because this is the most efficient way of learning when you haven't mastered anything, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think a lot of teams actually go through similar issues. I think Vitality's issues are just a bit more pronounced due to the fact that obviously they have like a really rookie team, and then they have moving pieces, like especially with Jacktor and Sealback now, that kind of come in and out, and then Saken now with Selfie. So I think the issues are more pronounced, but I think a lot of teams are just going through that non-identity phase where right now they don't really know how they're playing. They don't know what to do. I think we actually have similar issues, to be fair. Like we're not, like we don't have a clear-cut identity anymore, even though in the beginning of the split we had it. And it's partially due to the meta shifts too, where if you think about how tanks now have become more and more active in the top lane, you've had like less top side action, so bot sides become more dominant. And suddenly in a position where, hey, if you lose bot prior, you lose the health, you lose this and that. So I think Vitality's issues obviously come from the fact that they have like overall just a weaker roster than I expected, because I thought the players were going to be better, but also due to the meta shifts forcing adaptations quickly right now, where you have to shift from top to bottom styles, and Cabo Shard has always been a top dominant top laner.
And Cabo Shard himself kind of talked about waiting for something to click. And that was like the story that he told us, Yamato, when he came on PGO. He's waiting for the longest time for something to click with this roster. Is this a situation where you think your Vitality, you put your faith in that moment where you wait to click? Or is this a situation where, because some of those players are maybe weaker than expected, you start to look at pulling players off the team, making roster changes to do that, to find something that will make this team kind of mesh together coming into summer?
I think there is a sense of, I think that the whole clicking part is usually like I've been working in teams in the past where things haven't gone well, right? And during those times, all of the things that you know how to do well and you can do well usually does get shown, right? And when you're in that position, if you figure out one thing, like for example, when we replaced Gilius with Kikis, all of a sudden everyone looked better, right? And that's not only because Kikis performed better than Gilius, it's just because everyone else had the opportunity to also do what they know to do better, right? And that's a case of things clicking. But there is a fine line where you can't just wait and rely on it, because you need to have kind of a clear path. And I felt like Vitality was definitely lacking in this, because I think in terms of, I think you had a very good point in terms of adaptation. I felt like this split was very adaptation heavy. I felt like every week the meta shifted. 1 week Ornn is OP, the next one he isn't, the next one he is. And it was just over and over. Like, I think a lot of teams capitalized on just drafting better, like at the first 6 weeks, I think. And I think this is something that Vitality definitely couldn't keep up with. And I think it was a really, really big challenge. And I could really recognize that, even looking from outside, that, this is hard, come into a week. I remember I have many flashbacks of weeks where Tamkin's top is OP and we just lost the game because we just didn't know. And that happens sometimes, right?
Yeah. No, I agree. I think, a lot of champions have gone up and down in the priorities. Like Ornn is a good example. I think even jungle champions, like the whole jungle pool, and I think that's also been really bad for them too, where I think Skeens is really good on certain champions, especially when they carry heavy. I think once it moves more into Sejani, Gragas, Jarvan, then he becomes a lot weaker and he doesn't really perform to the standard that they used to.
To me, it sounds a lot like it's just kind of this perfect storm of problems to kind of keep Vitality down. I'm curious if the same is true for SK, because SK is a really interesting team for me. This is a team that there are players that I was very excited about on this roster. Interesting. Well, you guys can be more blunt than that if you want. But this is what I'll say. I was excited for Gen X at the start of the split. I'm not excited anymore. Sorry, buddy. pretty terrible split. Crownshot still seems like the best individual player on the team. Sakura, despite losing every single lane and being put on Ornn, for the entire first half of the split, just got subbed out last week when they were already knocked out. So this whole project is bizarre as hell to me. We expected this team, I think, Maurice, you weren't in these discussions at the start of the season, but maybe you shared the same opinion, to be pretty low based on the kind of bits and pieces that they put together. Pulling in Trick, as good as Trick has been, as someone else cast him aside, trying desperately to put a roster together. But like, how do you guys feel about SK? What do SK do now to kind of recover coming into summer?
You want to go?
I can do it.
Fly.
So I definitely think that they should implement more players from the academy team. I think if you're already that lost, where they have like 10 losses in a row right now, I think you just have to swap pieces. You just have to go through it. And I think the overall process for SK, I don't know how the hiring process went, obviously, but I think the roster itself was obviously weak to begin with, which is one issue because they haven't shown like anything last year. And besides Crownshot, and Trick was also someone that has always been like good on teams where like he has been good on teams when they had veterans, they had a lot of like veteran talent, and he could play around it. But if he's on a rookie roster, what is he going to do? Like he's not a mechanical jungler, so he's not going to carry. So I think you may as well just do a complete overhaul and see where that leads you. Not saying that any of those players don't deserve to be in LEC, but I think the overarching situation just makes it so academy players will probably be a better fit for their current honestly standings.
Yeah, I'm with you completely. I think like sometimes you're just in a position where it's better to take risks because what is the gain? Like what is the light with this roster? And I think it's very difficult to see. I think it was very difficult to see at the beginning of the split as well. Yeah. And I agree that Crownshot has been like a good light, but in terms of what an AD carry can do by himself, or anyone for that matter by himself in the current state of the game, it's very difficult. And I think you could see even in Ventair or whatever his name is. Ventair. Like, I think he played decent. Like, watching him, looking at his individual play, I think he played all right. And I think sometimes if you have a situation within a team, a dynamic where everyone is just in this dynamic, you lose over and over, it gets exhausting, it gets tiring, especially when you don't see that light, which I think this is a sentiment that most of the players on SK share. And when I saw Venter play, you saw it was refreshing. I felt like it was very similar with Steelback on Vitality. When you bring them in, they see it as an opportunity again. They haven't been through all of that pain and hardship and exhaustion. They are there to like, oh, this is an opportunity for me. I can prove something. And I think it definitely showed in Steelback's play. It showed in Venter's play. So I echo that sentiment to just take some risks on your players. It's the time to do it. Like, I don't know what. Yeah, for sure. I don't know what their academy looks like. Do you know their academy? Is it good?
They've been kind of bad this split as far as I know. I think Fennec is Fennec is, for example, the jungler for the academy team who has been like in the German team forever. I think he's actually decent on his level. And they have they have Tiger on ADC or support, something like that. Like I just remember that Fennec, at least someone like that who gives a bit of fire for the team, would probably help them. Like the weird conundrum for the whole team is just simply that like they have young players partially, but they play really old. Does that make sense? Like they play as if they're like in their 50s, and their backs are already broken, and they come into work, with like all kinds of health issues, cough into every microphone, and then they play these games out, So it's just like they have to just get some fire under their asses, to be fair, and they have to do something that basically gets them going. And I think someone like Ventura has already been a good addition. They just need more of that.
Accurate.
Aside from the old man commentary, which I'm just going to use anytime anyone is just like slowly dying in a League of Legends game, or their team is slowly just getting worse, just saying they're playing old man League of Legends. But aside from that, it just sounds like, SK just need a complete refresh. Now, the last team, and to me, the most interesting team is Schalke. And this is one where Maurice already kind of talked about them reverting to old playstyle habits. But to me, this looked like the best of the bottom four teams by the end of the split. How do you guys think about the Schalke roster overall? Because while Excel finished with a better scoreline, Schalke looked damn good actually, in the last few weeks.
They beat us too. So, I mean, I think what changed for them is simply the approach to the game. I think before that, they tried to please Forgiven almost. And I think that's what you have to do when you play on a Forgiven team. It's just how it is. Like he has a certain play style. It's not changing for years now. And it's always like the wave management he has is like really outdated. So you have to compensate for that. Like his abilities are good. Obviously his team fighting is great. Like his individual powers are up there. But it's just that the whole team has to adapt to his play style. And I think he generally does a weird job or bad job, honestly, at expanding his own play style and having other people cater to him. And it's like one of those things where if you overtake or you hijack basically your team's identity, you have to account for everything that you're doing. And what the team is doing. So, and I think when Forgiven plays, I think he doesn't do that. And it's more about the team adapts to him and hopes that it works out, So I think ever since changing him, the team has looked more like a team. I think they have done a lot less like solely individualistic styles, and then with Lurox instead of Gilius, it's the same thing again. Gilius is more individualistic. He's more like doing what he wants to do, whereas Lurox, especially from working him last year, he's someone that caters to the team and to the team needs. So I think they need more of that.
So I'm curious, Maurice, your take on. So basically, I remember this Odoamnet tweet. He was a bit upset about the fact that it was mentioned that Scrim God Schalke. How much do you think it applies? Because I think Schalke played their best week. I think Lurox and Abedage usually don't play that well. That could be for multiple reasons. That could be the 2-week break. That could be the whole the Scrim God complex. What do you think about the whole situation? Do you think Schalke is a Scrim God situation or just improvement and growth over these past 2 weeks?
I think they weren't really that good in scrims before they changed the players, honestly. I think Gillis was doing fine. I think Forgiven was doing fine too, but it's more like that the team just didn't work. It didn't click. So I think that's about it. I don't think there's necessarily Scrim Gods, but...
And more recently as well, though? What do you think about the transfer, like more recently, if we think about ever since Forgiven left?
I think it's improvement. I also think they're better in scrims than on stage, honestly, because they have kind of stage fight issues, which is to be expected if you have we have had these comments about Abedage like last year from Upset, I think. We talked about it. And then this year, I know Lurox personally because I brought him to the team last year. And from working with him, he was also kind of shutting down a bit in some clutch situations. And I think that may just be alleviated by the fact that they're at home now. So I think it plays into it. I don't think it's the main reason, though.
Okay.
Overall, Maurice, you're kind of focusing a lot about the past kind of Schalke and kind of the early struggles of Schalke in the split, but it does feel like Schalke are on an upward trajectory. Obviously, said they beat G2, they beat you guys, so holding out a decent amount of hope to close this one out. I want to reference one of our Twitter questions and get your guys' take. And if you got to give it to me straight, because I'm going to ask a difficult question, or maybe a not so difficult question, but one that's going to make PR answers quite difficult. Lixie at Solo Toast said, "Who is the worst team in the LEC at this point, and why?"
Is that even a question?
Who is it? Is it
SK? No, it's no question about
it. Yeah, for sure, SK.
SK is...
But they have an extra win.
Team. But they're barely a team. Like, they're just... Like, with Vitality, you look at the team and like, there's something happening. You're like, yeah, they could definitely win these games. And you watch SK, it's like, from start to finish, it's just not good. It's just not fun. Like, you look at them and you just want to like turn off the TV at that point,
Yeah, just inactivity, like complete flat line, no pulse, no nothing. When enemy is about to get the 4th Drake for the soul, that's when they blow the Orn Horn and throw an Orn ult, and they're like, "Nah, we can't engage on this. We're just gonna sit at Nexus," and then that's it. It's just. Whenever I saw their last drafts last week, I was like, okay, SK is going for an SK draft. Okay, not watching this one. I can talk about, if we do a post-match analysis desk, I know already what's going to happen, so it's all good. I don't need to look at this one. I'll take a break here.
Well, they definitely cured my insomnia, Like, that's all I can say.
All right, boys. Thank you. Sometimes I feel like you guys are so diplomatic in your approach. You're not trying to bruise any egos, but I felt like the full force of your disappointment or boredom when it comes to watching SK. They're playing 2 more games this week, by the way, for anyone at home. So be sure to tune in
Oh, sorry, my bad.
for thrilling League of Legends.
This is still meant to advertise LEC, right?
Yeah. And what they mean by cured his insomnia was they have. Never mind. It's fine. All right, but that transitions us into the next thing. Before we start talking about top 6, I wanted to take a break away from the more serious discussion and get some questions going from Twitter. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions. We are going for more off-topic stuff today, but I'll be throwing in some questions kind of as we go through the show. So first up, this one comes from, it's SPEJLE, and I'm going to be honest, the random J's in the middle of words. Kuba Shpeja 4 on Twitter. Sorry in advance if I pronounce your name wrong. It says, could my Clash team, this is a plat level Clash team, beat an NALCS team if we played on the European server and we'd be at home in Europe, so they'd be on 35 ping and NA teams would be in LA? Could a platinum level 5v5 or 5 team beat an LCS team on 130 ping? What, you really think so?
It's platinum.
Platinum's too bad.
Well, let's wait. Okay, so it's just that their platinum is too bad. What rank do you need to beat a professional team on 130 ping when you have perfect ping? Let's say.
Yeah, I mean, it also depends who you're talking about, right? Like, if you talk bottom tier, who's bottom tier LCS? It's Dignitas and CRG, and what is the other team? Well, it's CRG, no?
Yes, CRG.
Okay, so I think for CRG, you need like kind of like master tier probably, like maybe grandmaster, bottom tier grandmaster. I think for Dignitas, you only need to be like challenger upwards. I think. But for CRG, you can make.
you guys are making ping sound like such a non-issue. Because to me, I heard this and it's like, I feel like if to me, this is the same question as like, could you beat Usain Bolt in the running contest if you chopped off one of his legs? And I would say yes, I could beat Usain Bolt in the running line. How, like, is 130 ping not an issue?
It's like how? That's like a couple of toes right there only. That's not like that's not the whole foot, Like it will cause some balancing issues. You're like kind of like falling over maybe once, but I think it actually doesn't impact it as much. Like you can still, I think communication is the difference between like challenger grandmaster tier players and like BLG, LCS, LEC anyway. Like most of the players are just able to anticipate, and I think that makes a difference. Solo queue players are not able to anticipate, so ping doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
There's also the point of like I think usually like when you have like new teams, like we would have 5 players that like a Clash team, which is imagine there are 5 randoms that get together. Maybe one knows each other from an ice cream shop where they met or something. Who cares? And creating pathways to victory outside of solo queue is something that takes time. And I think even though like the macro point of how you play the game is not going to change that much on ping, I think also there is workaround in terms of you can pick champions that don't need like good mechanics, right? You can play like Heimerdinger and you can work it out. You play on high ping and whatever. I did that in Clash. Sejani Brom, yeah. So I think even Challenger it would have like a challenge to beat the bottom teams, honestly. But there's also like it's such a huge variance. Like you can have a good Challenger player and also like a one that like one trick Scion buys full lethality. There's a big variance.
Wait, that's a personal attack right there. there's a Shen OTP who keeps posting his videos and he's like, I don't know, he missed every taunt and still gets Edo because teams are just not respecting his ultimate. So I'm like, what the hell, like there's definitely a difference between China players. There's some are good, some are you can throw them out instantly. So it depends.
The Nunu one tricks and the
Siege
one tricks and the Shen one tricks and the X1 tricks.
Oh man, it's like back in the day before Challenger when I would play a lot. Like your friends would be like, "Oh, I'm Diamond 1." You'd be like, "All right, cool, but how much LP?" And they're like 20. You're like, "Oh, you suck." You're like 60. You're like, "Well, that's pretty good." You're like 80. You're like, "All right, this guy's legit." 80 LP, that's insane. Like I feel like it's the same thing for like, yeah, okay, you're Challenger, but what are you Challenger on? Oh, you're a one-trick pony on Teemo. Okay. Alan, was it Alan 123?
Oh God, Alan 234. Jesus Christ, this guy.
Yeah, so doesn't quite mean the same amount. Last question from Twitter for the day, except for the ones that we'll put in later. Gabriel Pinto Fanatic Gabraham. There it is. Both Amazing and Yamato are pros turned coaches. How has their career as players prepped them for coaching? What has changed in pro play since they're pro players? I want to focus on the second half of that question. What do you feel like has changed the most in pro play since you were both playing pro? Now, for you, Maurice, it's obviously very recent, and for you, Yamato, a little bit further back in your career.
I'm ancient.
The good old Dragonborn. Oh man, we could have played together on that team, by the way, but I just declined the offer. I was like, nope, I'm not gonna do that.
You dodged the bullet there, man. Because the gaming house, like that's a good place to start in terms of difference. Because the gaming house, like Shushay, like in the gaming house, Shushay's girlfriend was there, his mother was there, his whole family lived in the gaming house. He had a dog that, like, I was afraid of dogs at the time. That was like always staring at my food. The gaming house was terrible. Like we had to borrow laptops from Fnatic. So I think in general, the professionalism of everything, coaching staff, and just the seriousness of everything, because even at the time I was traveling back and forth. Like I was going to school and I was also playing at the same time. I was like traveling to Cologne, and the flight there was just shit, like 10 hours. And I think just the general just professionalism of everything, coaching, the idea of health, the idea of longevity, planning in general, creating as much efficiency as possible in every aspect of your gameplay, instead of just, oh, let's get these guys in the same room playing on the same PCs. But even at that time, that was like insane. Like, so, oh, we have a gaming house. Whoa, we can sit in the same room without our parents nagging us. Holy moly. So it's like, if I look back at that, crazy. But if I looked at that back in season 1, I was like, oh my goodness, this is a miracle. You know, this is my dream. So it's a constant evolution.
I feel like it's slowed down a little bit in terms of like season 1 to season 3 differences, though. Because by season 5, parents probably weren't in the gaming house anymore. By season 8, like you guys, there's chefs in the gaming house now, and that is a lot of progress. But it's still a gaming house, right? You're not like, I guess facilities are the biggest change, which a lot more teams are doing.
Yeah, I think that's actually like the separation of living space and workspace again. I think that's been the biggest difference in the last 2 years, I'd say. But I think overall, the meta shifts have just been incredible. Like how the game was like basically an individualistic game. I think season 3, season 4, where everyone could just solo carry. Like I remember my games when I was playing Lee Sin, like every single game was just like I could win the game just by being myself, like by just playing. You know, nowadays you actually have to communicate. You have to talk about a lot of things more. Like there's so many more definitions nowadays of terms we didn't even use back then. Like tempo is a good one. Like tempo was introduced in season 6, season 7. It didn't exist before that. Like where like shifting, overloading, these kind of things, like all of this terminology, and then on top of that, like how coaching actually works nowadays compared to back then. I think back then, like there were so many coaches that were basically just like bona fide team managers, I guess. You know, they're like just giving some input here and there, maybe cook you a meal or two, you know. And then nowadays like it's just so different. Like coaching is actually meaningful. Coaching actually requires like back knowledge, like discipline and understanding of the game, whereas before that was more like, yeah, I guess you should just flash there, you know, 2 centimeters to the right so you wouldn't die there in this situation. Thank you. That was my coaching. So
honestly, that was my biggest motivation, man. That was like my coaching experience in the past was like, that is every person that I work with during my time as a player was like, they were just shitting and spitting on the role. You know, It was like no respect at all. And it was like, okay, I'm going to go into the role and all of the snakes will eventually be filtered out, you know? And I feel like we are slowly reaching the point where, you know, there is respect to the role and all of the people that don't belong are no longer in the scene.
Would you want to name on individually? Would you want to call someone out?
No. I'm good. They wouldn't hear this anyway. They're not in the scene.
Oh yeah, true. Well, in that case,
look. So I'll just be honest. So I wasn't a snake, but I was like I did an analysis back in season 3 for Niantasso when he played on CLG for a very small period of time because he's like, I want to be a great top laner. So he put a call out on Twitter for analysts, and I was like, I'm a genius. I understand League. Keep in mind at this point in my career, I'm gold and I don't know shit about League of Legends.
God,
and I didn't at the time. I did not know. So it's me, this silver guy, and who's the current TSM coach? What's his name?
Peter Zhang.
Not Peter Zhang. God, what is his name? Former CLG coach. Eventually was a CLG head coach forever. Zixlal. Tony.
Yeah, he's
Zix.
one of these.
Yeah, Zixlaw was the third person. So the only person probably competent enough to be giving Nian advice. And we have a Skype chat, and me and the Silver Kid are spamming him with advice. Nian, Zach, Tony, the only guy who actually is qualified to do anything, is saying literally nothing, probably DMing him separately because we're both idiots. I'm looking at replays being like, look, man, I see that you're grouped with the team here, but like, right now this camp is up. Like, you need more money. You could just be going to this camp right now. Like, I don't know what you're doing grouping with your team. Like, we're not min-maxing your time effectively. And this is like, I'm the guy who's like, if you would flash 2 centimeters to the right, you would have lived. You could have done it, Nian. That was the difference.
So you doomed NA, Dracos. No, I'm kidding. But if he chose to take advice from gold and silver, then honestly,
that's on him right there.
What is he smoking?
But then again, coaches nowadays are partially actually like not like former players anymore, you know. So you technically have to take advice from silver or bronze. I think isn't it Peter Dunn like bronze 5, bronze 4, or something like that?
I don't know.
I think that was something like that, you know.
That is wild.
All I'll say is I sincerely hope he took none of our advice. I made him videos and spreadsheets and reports, and I reread them back like a month ago. Maybe I'll put them out, and they're awful. I was, even by season 3 standards, a super moron at the time. I remember even within this next 6 months talking to other people, realizing I'm like, oh, wave pressure. Oh, that's a thing. And I was just like randomly quoting like whatever Monte Cristo had said on the LCK back to Nian, like he didn't watch it. I was like, these are the things you got to consider if you want to be good, like CJ whatever.
Yo, Dracos, did you put this on your resume afterwards? Coach, pro player.
I bring it up. I was like, whenever someone's like, you used to be a colorcaster, I was like, and an analyst. Don't forget about that. So yeah, wow, the snakes that you're talking about getting weeded out, at least one of them became a caster. So,
oh God, is that really for the better? No, you see more audience. No.
I'll say I'm much more educated, and I definitely don't try to tell random pro players how to play the game anymore, except for when they're objectively running it down. Which I'll let be the final point on my random tangent there. Let's get back to the LEC and the state of top 6. Top 6 is now locked. We've got G2, Fnatic, OG, Misfits, Rogue, and Mad Lions. Seeding is not locked. Position is not locked, but these are your top 6 teams. And to kick things off, Yamato, you kind of have an assessment of Misfits that I would love for you to share, so we can get Maurice's take on your take.
Give it to me.
So my read on you guys was, I think that the biggest strength that you guys had is, like I love teams that play through mids and create pressure through mid because it's central, is the quickest. You have options to play into either side. You can make defensive moves. You can make aggressive moves. I love that. I think it's fantastic. Most of the games that I saw you guys play was heavily into top side, and I think this was very rare in the LEC and globally in general because most teams had the habit of just like locking Misfortune, using the fact that you have good base timers, play on first Drake into Rift and so forth, just the easy step-to-step basis. And the thing that I noticed the most was I felt kind of similar to what you mentioned at the top of the show, that you guys kind of lacked the identity. I think coming into this week, some of the weakness in playing through bottom side was highlighted. I think the Varos Galio game looked very, very wonky. I remember the game against Fnatic as well. Like barring, of course, the TP mid lane situation, it was very, very close. And Pantheon like didn't get the kill on Veigar. He got away, and the GP TP got a red buff, and it kind of collapsed the whole game. Yeah. Just the whole idea of Pantheon splitting the map into bot side, I like the approach of like, okay, they're trying to play into bottom and trying to create a situation where they dive, but it also kind of fumbled. So the weakness that I've always pointed out on broadcast was, okay, this is a team that is predictable in the way they play, and when they have to play through bottom, it looks a lot weaker. And this is my assessment of Misfits. What do you think about this?
No, I think it's pretty accurate. I think the last couple of weeks, especially, we've tried to work on that because it's become an active thing where we're like, hey, what if teams actually figure us out? What teams actually, holistically speaking, just watch our pick bands, like how we approach it. And how like we usually sacrifice like 80 carry picks in the first 2, like for example red side, so we could easily get counter picked. Like in these kind of situations, like you expose the bot lane. And I think we've identified that for ourselves. It's also been a weird scenario where I think some of the momentum we had during the 7-game win streak obviously has kind of gone to waste. So I think it could also just be fatigue overall, where we're like, we're still a team that can obviously still play the game, but we're kind of fatigued by the fact that it's been such a long season. Some of the players had to come from general season and suddenly play LEC, so it's been like a constant transition, and they never had the downtime. So I think that all plays into it. I think for now, what we have to fix gameplay wise, and which you also address, is basically be less reliant honestly on counter picks on top side of the map. Don't have to win through top side of them anymore, and make the game more replicable. We play through bot lane, open up the map through Drakes, through Heralds, and then just play the game a standard way. I think having that in your repertoire is so important nowadays, because in playoffs, it's not about which team is making like more plays, honestly. Like that rarely happens because everyone knows everything. They have seen so much footage of you. They will always be prepared. What you have to do is like have to clean macro. And then like if you have to clean macro, like one team will fumble, one team will make mistakes, and then it's about capitalizing that very moment. So
when we look at your team overall, I think we can see in general that there's the top two, there's kind of Origin, and then I feel like there's you, Mad Lions, and Rogue kind of all in the midst of this very chaotic pack that I feel like changes from week to week. Now, last week was a pretty rough week for Misfits.
I could say so.
We could recap the game, but we could just remind everyone it was the 2K gold lead for Misfits into a pretty big throw, and then some of the most abysmal stats of all time. B-Boy, for example, did 105 damage per minute as Misfortune in that game. He literally only got to hit creeps for the entire game from that point forward. But of course, a game like this is going to tank your stats, so I'm not taking too much from it, but I'm curious, like, that was a very tangible example of you versus another team that you're fighting for position against. Like, how do you feel about the level of your team compared to the likes of Rogue, to the likes of Mad Lions as we get closer and closer to playoffs?
I'm not worried at all about Mad Lions. I think Mad Lions does a lot of mistakes in the gameplay, even though they got away with, I guess, some of those things. I think us and them are really similar level. If not, I still think we're better, because like I think we just have better players overall, and I think it's up to the coach staff in that regard to fix the gameplay issues or iron them out. I'm more worried about Rogue, because I think Rogue and Fnatic, what they do spectacularly well is attack the early game, and they're also, like, especially Rogue is really bot lane centric. They play from mid lane, then look for a dive, like early game plays, and then Hansama and Vander are just really, really good bot laners. So I think they expose us more than most of the other teams. So I would say Rogue is better than us right now. I think we should be even or ahead of Mad Lions despite the difference in standings.
I think on my end, when I think of Mad Lions, I feel like they're almost the opposite of you guys, in the sense that I think whenever they play through topside, it looks very, very bad. And they've always drafted a very similar way. Orome on either Ornn, GP. They tried the Aatrox into you guys, and like they fumbled a couple of dives, and it was like, they were trying to force something that usually doesn't work. I think they are the type of team that when Kaiser and Shadow have the space together, I think they take very, very good decisions in terms of how they control space. And I think this is something that they do better than, I would say, you guys and also Rogue. Yeah. But I also have the issue of, if something changes coming into next week, if they're in a position where they have to play through top, I would put them as less reliable. I think the key thing for them has always been, in the current state of the meta, I think they are very, very happy with the whole simple idea of just making sure that bottom is enabled. They played the Kalista. I think that's huge. They figured out how to play Misfortune very, very early on, and they didn't play a lot of Aphelios, and Aphelios is getting nerfed. So I think meta-wise, Mad Lions is looking very, very well positioned to just continue playing the same way without making any drastic changes. And I think that's a huge positive coming into the playoffs. And on the Rogue point, I think they are very, very good in terms of understanding of, like, I think when I watch their games and I watch their pro views against the best teams, meaning like if they play against Fnatic or G2, always, like those extra steps that are happening in terms of like applying pressure with TP from topside or mid, or applying pressure with support in order to get prio. I think when they get prio and they get the space to like just push waves freely, I think they play very, very well. As you mentioned, they create the dives, they create the snowball. But then the moment there is like resistance, let's say there's a situation where they can't have that prio in mid lane for some reason, and they need to use more moving pieces in order to achieve this. They need to work together, maybe use pressure from topside because that's a winning matchup, hover into river, take mid prio, something like this. When there's more moving pieces, I see that they struggle. And I can imagine that in a world where Rogue plays against you guys, and you guys are a bit better, I think, in terms of playing through mid, I think this can be always an advantage, because you'll always hear me talking about any team that plays through mid. I'm very, very happy about this, because I think it's just the best way to play the game always. If you are playing 1-3-1 from like the point where your support has boots, I think you can always control the map in whatever shape or form that you want. So I think that's a huge positive as well coming into playoffs, because this is something the teams will eventually have to figure out when they play against a team that does.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like mid prio has become really, really important, especially in this meta due to how the bot lane centric it is also, because if you have access through mid lane, you always have access to bot lane too, and then the enemy bot lane can shuffle out the waves, they get slow pushed upon, they get dove, they get denied waves, you have entry to the jungle, you get the early Herald swap, so mid is really, really interconnected with bot lane right now, and I think I agree. Like I think honestly playoffs will probably come down to like for example us against mid lanes. If that's a matchup, I think it's down to us just understanding humanoids like roam patterns and how to shut down Kai'Sa. I think Kai'Sa and Shadow, and I think that's being done for mid lane and for Rogue. I honestly think we just have to get a bit better at our bot lane laning phase. I think that's actually a huge issue. I think it's them, because they're really abusive in the way that they actually orchestrate the bot lane. Like look for picks 24/7 and then try to figure out how to win the lane from that. And I think if we get better at that, I think we should be more evenish against Rogue too. And then it comes down to execution in the end.
I think for me, when I look at it, I'm always a little bit worried about your bot lane, because on the one hand, B-Boy's like insane when he gets out of laning phase scot-free. Like every game where I see you guys play around top side and B-Boy just gets to be like, I don't know, the stock standard 80 carry, the man pops off. And then you have games, like the game that you have versus Mad Lions, where he's kind of just running around catching waves. He's not getting a lot done. And I feel like while Mad Lions have been spending this entire time prepping Misfortune and playing Misfortune, now they're busting out the Callista. I feel like you were a team that really benefited from Aphelios. Just leave your bot lane on Aphelios, Tom Kench. You could live there forever, and your top side could do whatever they want and not really have to worry about your bot side getting punished.
No, I agree. I agree with that. I think like that secondary AD carry, like. And we've seen that we've been experimenting with that, and I think hopefully come playoffs, like we'll have that in mind. Maybe even a third AD carry, but there's definitely still champions that weren't quite sure yet if we want to pull them out, like against weaker opponents, if that's actually worth it, or if we want to save them for playoffs. So I think there's definitely still some room to grow for us, and there's already been improvement in that regard.
I'm excited to see what more looks like, and just in general, what more of these spicy picks might look like. Obviously, you can't share, but I'm ready to see how deep the
maybe I can
go.
Share. No, I can't.
If you want, I mean, I've always
Ezreal.
That's really spicy. It's so spicy. Holy
so spicy. Ooh, wow, Ezreal. Oof. Resident sleeper. Okay, so looking out of this discussion, we've kind of talked a lot about the bottom three of the top six. I guess if that makes sense. You guess you call it middle of the pack. I don't really know how to refer to it. 4, 5, 6 at this point. But I am curious how much you guys think the current standings line up to actual team skill. So for a recap, G2 Esports, Fnatic, and Origin are tied second. We've got Mad Lions sole possession of fourth currently. Misfits and Rogue are technically tied. Yeah, they have the head-to-head. So if the split ends at this point, obviously they're going to get it. But currently you guys are tied. How closely does this actually mirror? Because right now, Mad Lions are like clear fourth, uncontested there for now. They have some solid head-to-heads against a lot of the other top teams. You're obviously 1-1 with them. Rogue is 1-1 with them. But you I feel like you, when you're talking about Mad Lions, Maurice, put them down a little bit further. Are they like the sixth best team in playoffs, regardless of their seeding? Are they the worst team that we expect coming into these playoffs?
I would say individually, yes, like compared to all the other teams, I feel like they just don't have the player strength right now. So I would put them down there, and I think in playoffs, like I think a lot of the macro will be kind of honestly analyzed more so by other teams, and there will be like it will be put to light to a certain extent what they're doing. So I think they are the weakest team. I think we're now then the fifth best team. I think Rogue is fourth. Third, I think OG is quite right there. I think Fnatic and G2 are actually interchangeable. I think both teams are extremely good. They're just good in their own right. I think Fnatic has just looked weirdly off tempo, I would say, against G2, where for some reason they feel urged to make too many plays at the same time, and suddenly they lose the game, or that if inertia they're going for, even though the game was already won. So Fnatic punishes mistakes better than G2, I would almost say, where the early game is a lot more solid. But G2 is just better at analyzing mid to late game situations where it's more about the in the moment kind of decision making that is required to react to that.
Now, Yamato, there's a lot to unpack there because Maurice, you gave us a lot there. So first off, how do you feel about Maurice's ranking? Let's start there and go from there.
Well, I think like currently with what we saw most recently, I would put Misfit sixth. But of course, I don't know what's going on the inside camp of Misfits. I don't think it's such a strange assessment because this last week was very rough and the identity issues. But I think this is something that can change because of the mid lane point that I made earlier. I'll put them sixth. And then, for me, it's really weird between Mad Lions and Rogue because I can't imagine a world where Rogue would win against Origin, Fnatic, or G2. I think they would struggle super, super hard against these teams. I would see Mad Lions being able to upset maybe a game or two against these teams, but then I would put Rogue in the light where they will always beat Mad Lions. So it's hard for me to put 4 and 5. It depends on what you prefer the most. It's like, Mad Lions are probably better off getting fourth because maybe they can cause some damage. Maybe they can take a game or two off of G2 or Fnatic, depending on who chooses what on the seeding bracket. But Rogue, I think, would win against Mad Lions always. My biggest worry now against Orome, I think, looking at their games where they won, I think he always got away with murder against the top teams. Like there was one game where they played against G2, like the first game of the season, he played Ornn that turned out to be really busted and OP. And there's a lot of scenarios where I think Orome is just... I think in coming into playoffs, a team like G2 or Fnatic, when they sit down and really prepare for something like Mad Lions, I think they're going to eat them alive. So as I'm speaking loudly and I'm making this assessment, probably I would just put Mad Lions fifth and Rogue fourth. And then 3-2-1, I would... I think you made a very interesting, compelling point there about G2 Fnatic. I think I am inclined to put G2 first, but I think the games that they showed throughout the season, definitely, I think the last one that they played, Fnatic should have won that. That was very, very strange. It's so hard to watch those games, G2 and Fnatic, because it's so obvious that there is so much emotions at play. Like even the players talk about it. It's like, it's Fnatic, they need to beat this team. There's so much on the line. They need to make it clean. They need to make it hard. They need to go all out. And I think it shows because I think both teams look very strange in the way they play.
Yeah.
The last time they face each other, Fnatic definitely should have won. Like maybe they can scale super hard with Janna or whatever, but I think the adaptation of the Predator boots on top was super, super insane. I thought that was like really big brain and they got ahead and they had this nice composition. I just think G2 is more resilient to any potential meta changes that might happen throughout playoffs. I think they are also very happy that the Felios is getting nerfed. I think that's a big plus. And I think they also have a lot of weapons that they haven't showcased completely yet. I think the Talia one is quite interesting. Maybe they can play more things on bottom. They have the Syndra bottom as well. I don't know. I just feel like G2 can get a bit more funky in terms of preparing for best of fives. And I think that's why I want to lean towards it. And I'm just worried as well when I think of who is meta dependent, I'm just looking at Nemesis the most. Luckily in 10.6, like Tiev is getting buffed a little bit at least, or whatever. Nemesis, if he's playing Assassins, I'm like, I don't like this. Like the Akali, 10 games of Akali or whatever it was in playoffs, that looked really, really rough to me. When he plays mages, when he plays Cassio in a good matchup, when he gets to play like split pushes and he's playing a role where he needs to just pay attention to the map, I think he does this very intelligently. But when things are beginning to like happen through him, whether it's an assassin matchup that is forced or something, then I am less convinced with Nemesis. So I think the perks advantage is what I'm leaning towards. So G2 would be my first and Fnatic second. But it's very close. I agree with that assessment of Maurice.
So this is one of the most asked questions over like the last, I don't know, pretty much every week on any thread that I look at on Twitter or otherwise is this the closest that Fnatic and G2 have ever been? And then there's also stuff like, is the region getting worse because Fnatic are closer to G2? People trying to like extrapolate and take things as far as they can. But I'm curious how you guys feel about that. Is this the closest that G2 and Fnatic have ever been? Because this isn't a 1-1. There's no tiebreaker here, right? This is a 2-0 for G2 over the course of the season. The games might have been close, but last season we got 2 full best of 5s. Is it going to be? But that was like chaos, crazy game 5 nonsense. Like, is this going to be the strongest form of both of these teams that we've seen yet, or the closest form rather, coming into playoffs?
I actually don't know. It's so hard to say. It's too hard. It's too hard to say. I think last year they were just slightly closer because of the fact that the strategies that Fnatic had per se were a lot clearer to me, I would say, where I'm like, okay, I'm trying to figure out how to beat this. It's really hard to beat. What would you do against it if you're G2? And I think a lot of the times G2 didn't even know what to do. So I think this year it's been slightly more pronounced in the way like how Fnatic plays and how G2 plays. I think there's been slightly more clear about it. And I'm like, I think G2 has more answers to what Fnatic is doing than last year. So I still think they're really close.
Yamato?
I think on my end, like looking back at the series between Fnatic and G2 when they went to 10 games, I felt like Fnatic was in their best form of the whole year. And I think G2 was in their best form of the whole year in 2019. G2 in summer looked really, really wonky. Like we had a lot, like we won a game against them when they picked Garen. Like they barely gave a shit because they just came off of MSI, and it makes sense that they're taking it easy. And I think coming into playoffs, they got kind of shocked by the level of Fnatic, and I think this kind of kicked things into gear, and then the rest is history, right? So I think G2 looked very weak there. Fnatic was in peak form coming into playoffs and going into Worlds. They continued the same pattern. I think the key thing for me with Fnatic is, I think when they played against G2, they had a very, very predictable way of playing in the sense that most of the time their efforts are going to go through the bottom side because the wave management of Reckless and Hylissang is just the best. It's clearly the best. They do it wonderfully, very, very good. And even though this is predictable, it is so good that it doesn't matter. It's like, what do you do against, right? Yeah. And I think in some cases, there were game situations where you needed to play through top, you needed to play through mid, like Caps wasn't having the best series. And this is something that Fnatic couldn't really adapt to on the fly because most of the jungle pressure just went into bottom because this is where the comfort laid. And I think when you have matchups top that are like Kled and Jax and these explosive matchups that might shift because G2 force it through some kind of draft adaptation, then I think things looked rougher for Fnatic last year. And looking at Fnatic this year, I think they are more flexible in terms of adapting throughout the series their gameplay. I imagine a world where they actually play through mid now. I imagine a world where they actually play through top. In the question of are they closer than last year, it's hard to make that assessment because of, I think G2 in peak form was still much, much better than Fnatic in peak form last year. Much, much better. This year, I can imagine it's different. But then I asked the question, is Fnatic and G2 close to peak form? I think G2 is very, very far from it as well. Yeah. Because they're testing with Caps in bottom side and so forth. And I don't know what their approach is going to be to this playoffs. Are they going to view it now, okay, week 9 is over, we're going to practice super hard, we're going to figure this out, we're going to plan to stomp this? Then I think G2 could look very, very lethal and better than Fnatic. I think it's all about their approach. So it's hard to answer it straight on.
It's also weird because we've got this entire kind of this asterisk over the whole thing, which is we're playing it online.
Yeah.
You don't know. Like if it was regular spring playoffs, we'd be asking this question about G2 anyway. But because it's regular spring playoffs plus all online, it's like twice as many questions to ask, twice as much reason for G2 if they need to take a break somewhere to relax. We've talked to them a lot about how they're kind of taking it easy. Maybe that changes for playoffs. We'll have to see. To kind of round out and work more towards the end of this discussion, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the matches that are coming up this week, kind of the matches that really matter, because Maurice, while you're like, hey, I'm pretty comfortable that we're like 5th place right now, we're right behind Rogue. I feel like you guys have the most unfortunate situation because despite being tied with Rogue, you don't own the head-to-head, and you also have to play G2 this week. Do you feel like resigned to 6th place at this point? Like, what's the hope for breaking through?
Power rankings are not quite equal to the standings, so I think I'm fine with getting 6th place and then beating whoever we're going to face in the first round of playoffs. Hopefully, it's going to be Mad Lions. So I think this week obviously is a bit tough because of G2, but we also don't know the level because the last time we played them, we also beat them. So I think it's like a week-to-week thing where some weeks they look better, some weeks they look worse. Recently, they've looked better. But I mean, I wouldn't bet, like, I wouldn't entirely bet against my luck, but I think it's like a 60-40 for them, 70-30 maybe.
Now, the other thing that's interesting to me is that it's kind of like if you want to play Mad Lions, the only way that happens is if you're expecting that Mad Lions lose to both Fnatic and OG.
Yes, I expect that.
I'm curious from you, Yamato, is there any shot here for Mad Lions? Because look, it's like 4th place versus the 2 teams tied for 2nd.
I don't know. I think it's best of ones, right? So anything can happen. I don't want to deny that possibility. I am leaning towards, obviously the better teams winning, but anything can happen. Best of ones is just the element of it. I think Mad Lions definitely this weekend, even they were saying themselves that the stage jitters were easier to deal with. I think the form they showed was decent. I think against you guys specifically, like they fell super far behind because they tried something different with the whole top play and so forth. Like Razork was all over the place and getting frags everywhere. So it's like always Mad Lions is like even within a game quite inconsistent, but then it kind of settles down when it comes into the later parts of the game. There is a world where it happens, but I am doubtful. Yeah.
Rogue's got a weak schedule, no? They play, on paper weak, but
on paper weak. Yeah, they play SK, which worst team in the league, expected to beat them. They play Schalke, which might be challenging, but you would still, I think, favor them to win. So Rogue's pretty solid. The only issue is if they're tied on scoreline. I believe are they 0-2 in a head-to-head? No, they're 1-1 in a head-to-head, and Mad Lions' win record in the second half is actually super good, which is the second tiebreaker criteria. So they'll win that tiebreaker. So basically, Rogue, not 100% because I don't know all the scenarios, but they essentially have to finish ahead of Mad Lions in score to win because they do not win out on a tiebreaker.
Okay.
So,
well, we'll see. We'll see what happens. As I said, like I think it doesn't matter as much like what happens like honestly before playoffs either, because as Yamato has put it, like the best of one scenarios can be really volatile. I think you don't quite know what to expect a lot of times because of the week to week adaptation. It kind of worries me though in general, like for the sake of playoffs and for the competitiveness, that there's only 1 week break basically, so it's basically just another regular week. So like how a lot of teams are going to adapt if we're going to see like more and more meta changes between the weeks, if there's going to be an established meta for playoffs or what's going to happen, right? So like that's the only thing I'm thinking about, where maybe this is going to be the Wild West, and every single week we'll see like complete different things happening because everyone is playing online. Like the solo queue has been terrible due to the fact that everyone has high ping right now, like in the whole of Berlin, like 80 ping, can't even play properly solo queue. So maybe it's just going to be like certain niches in the scrim schedules where, for example, one team is scrimming one team more and suddenly developing their own meta that works against that meta, that kind of stuff. So it's gonna be the Game of Thrones of playoffs basically, where like you'll have like Lennox, maybe it's us and like whatever is 4th, 3rd place gonna scrim against one another, and suddenly we're gonna have like our elephants coming in, so we'll see how that goes.
It's always tough before like if you reach playoffs, you play week 9 and then you have 4 days until you play playoffs again. I think like in a lot of cases you have like, oh, let's just get to playoffs and we'll figure out everything. And it's like you come into that practice week where you're bleeding and it's just you're soaking and it's just everything is in shambles, and you're hoping that is the week where everything kind of falls into place. And in my experience, it's very, very difficult to pull off. I think right now, this week and next week, what teams are going to showcase, I think, is going to be very similar to what we're going to see in playoffs too. As what we mentioned before, like teams that we're relying on, for example, Aphelios gets nerfed. I don't know how bad it is now. Like he has a life steal early on, and less damage. So maybe it puts him down in prio, or maybe just keeps getting played. Who knows? The champ is weird. And the teams that play Misfortune are favored. Maybe Varus, maybe Ezreal. Who knows? It's like, what have you gathered over the split? What do you have to show for yourself at the end? Because I think we're not going to have like some miracle changes. Like this week of practice, just we popped off and everything landed. The ping was only good in our gaming house, so we were screaming out. I don't know. I doubt in this limited amount of time that there will be like miracle changes.
I never know. It's the glass fiber coming in,
Honestly, I think weird is the best way to describe it. I'm not sure what to expect at all. I'm slightly more concerned coming out of this conversation, Maurice, that you also don't really know what to expect. 80 ping solo queue. Everyone's playing from home / office / whatever. It's going to be the weirdest playoffs of all time. But before we get to playoffs, there is week 9 of the LEC, which starts tomorrow at 6 p.m. We're continuing to work behind the scenes on improving the LEC and EUphoria from home. So thank you again for joining us for EUphoria episode 11. Thank you, Maurice, for coming on. I'm pointing at Maurice. You can't really see where I'm pointing, but that's fine. Thanks for joining us. Thank you as well, Yamato, for joining me as always. This has been EUphoria episode 11, and we'll see you next week.